Hi, everybody. It's Margie Meacham. Welcome back to the Learning to Go podcast. And today my guest is Nanette Miner. She is the managing consultant of the Training Doctor, and she's also one of Learning Bench's founding members. I've asked her here today to talk about her work in both capacities. So welcome, Nanette. Please tell me about the Training Doctor.
Sure. Thanks for having me, Margie. So the Training Doctor is an instructional design firm. We've been in business for 26 years now. We work with mostly Fortune 500 companies, and we design corporate curriculums for their employees, and then we hand them back to the client for implementation. So we don't do the facilitation, we don't do implementation, we simply do the course design and curriculum design and development of all the materials, and then we hand it back to our clients. So in the big picture, we're a work-for-hire organization. We don't have any long-term claim to any of their content, and generally the reason companies hire us is because what we're doing for them is unique or proprietary, and so they own it to begin with. They give us half or more than half the content to begin with. They give us reams and reams of content, or they give us subject matter experts to work with, and we have to pull that knowledge out of their heads and make a course out of it. So, big picture, it's their content from start to end, and we just put it into a format where people can learn from it, implement it on the job, and be successful with it.
Okay, now speaking of curriculum though, you've also done something new recently that's really interesting. You've developed a corporate curriculum expressly around teaching people how to think. Why did you do that?
Well, there's a couple of reasons. Some are societal, and then some are just my personal value system. So the societal reasons are higher ed used to do that for us. It used to teach thinking skills, and you may have seen there was a Wall Street Journal article in the last month that declared that most higher educational institutions do not increase critical thinking at all. We've seen it in, I feel we've seen it in plenty of news stories in the last year between Volkswagen and Wells Fargo, and the fact that the CEO of Uber just had to step down. There's just, in my opinion, a lot of people making poor decisions, a lot of high-level people making poor decisions that's really, not just embarrassing or a hiccup, but things that are bringing companies to their knees. And I really feel as though some of that, I can't think that's all going to be changed with thinking skills, but I really believe that some of that could be changed if people had a broader understanding of what I call thinking skills, and that's such a generic term, but it's, problem solving, decision making, understanding strategy, understanding who your stakeholders are, understanding competitive analysis, understanding market forces. It's like all these things that most people who hold a job don't get. They don't really understand the big picture. There's a lot of people I've met who couldn't tell you, really how their company makes business. They could tell you, it makes money. They could tell you what they do for that company, but they couldn't really tell you in the big picture how their role fits into the organization and how that company makes money. So from that, there's that societal feeling or black cloud that's been hanging over me for a while. And then as an instructional designer and as a founder of a company or a manager of a company that designs curriculums, which are really short-term, very specific, usually focused on a topic, although they're very successful, and I've had plenty of feedback from students who have said, wow, that's the best training class I've ever had, and we get a lot of repeat and referral business, so I know that we're doing good work. In my mind, and this is like my value system, it's hard to make a difference when you're only designing one class or you're only designing one curriculum. You really can't make, if somebody says that's the best class I ever had, that's a nice accolade, but that doesn't mean overall you've increased your capabilities as a business person, as a contributor to your business. So I felt like I needed a broader platform. I felt like I could do a better service to the organizations that I serve if I gave them sort of an end-to-end solution. It's not, here's this one class in decision-making and hopefully your people will be better at it, but here's a whole curriculum that develops decision-making in a bunch of different realms.
Okay, well, go ahead.
I'm sorry. I was just going to conclude it. I also feel like companies don't utilize training and learning in a strategic way. And so our curriculum is really designed to be more strategic. It's to take people from a infancy, and I don't mean that in the sense of age, but just where you are in your thinking abilities, and over a course of many years, develop people into better thinkers, and therefore that contributes better to the organization because they're going to be making better decisions, they're going to be making more well-reasoned decisions, hopefully more ethical decisions. So there's a lot of different topical areas, different nuances that go into our thinking curriculum. We're not just teaching creativity or decision making or problem solving or continuous improvement. We are teaching all of those things and in a very, I don't want to say too structured approach, because I think the thing that makes it so appealing to the companies who are our clients is that it's completely tailored to what you want to enhance in your organization and what capabilities you want to enhance in your people. So we have kind of a menu of things that we can develop in your employees, and a plethora of ways that we can do that, and then through working with that organization, we'll design a curriculum that is solely their curriculum, that is solely geared towards developing the skills and the knowledge and the capabilities that they need in their organization.
Okay, well, that actually answered what was going to be my next question, which was, is this some kind of a, canned package off the shelf? And clearly it's not. What you do is really get, it's just kind of, it sounds like to me, an expansion of what you've always done in terms of developing curriculum based on their proprietary information. Only now you're applying those skills to the particular thinking skills that are needed inside their organization based on what you know about their employees. Do I have that right?
Yes, and generic thinking skills that everybody ought to have as well. Like critical decision making. I mean, I can give you an example of how we teach decision making. Most people make decisions based on very minimal amounts of input, basically based on their experience or their gut feeling, or what they think would be in their best interest, and they don't really think broadly about, is this the right decision for the organization? It's kind of like being a general in the Army, right? You have to make the decision for the best of the organization, and not necessarily for this particular battle or this particular soldier or this particular unit.
So I think that you're absolutely right about that. And in fact, the science would prove you out, because, and I know that you have a background in learning science as well. So I'm preaching to the choir here. A lot of our decisions are really, our core decision-making process was built when we weren't even humans yet. It's embedded
right.
in a very primitive part of our brain that for shorthand is sometimes called the lizard brain. And typically we make a decision based on those subconscious or even unconscious self-preservation instincts. And then that part of the brain tells the cerebral cortex, where the higher level thinking is supposed to take place, okay, here's your marching orders, now go and justify it. And that's right. What the cerebral cortex does, is rather than really assessing and looking at the big picture and making a responsible, carefully thought out strategic decision, and this is true for anyone at any level, which kind of explains some of those things you talked about at the beginning of the interview. How can people who have gotten to this level, who have achieved so much, how can they then go off and do something that, forgive me, but there's really probably no better word for it than incredibly stupid. And
exactly.
And the reason is we are all built that way, particularly in times of stress when we most need a critical thinking skill, like, a really high risk kind of situation for the business. Our survival skills kick in, and we often make decisions that might have been very effective for a caveman running from a saber-toothed tiger, but are not really effective in today's modern world and highly complex social interactions. So, so given all that, my next question for you is, so how do you teach someone, and I know you can't deliver the entire curriculum to us, but how do you teach someone to recognize what's going on and flip off the lizard brain and intentionally use the tools they have at their disposal in their amazing cerebral cortex?
Well, so I want to be clear that although you and I have just gone down this wonderful path about decision making, the curriculum is not just about decision making. That is one small element of it,
Oh,
and
got
how
it.
thinking
Yes.
skills influence that. So we teach a lot of other things like, creativity. Like, one of the things I think we've done as a disservice in training over the last couple of decades, and I think it's because of cost savings, is we really silo people into learning curriculum, so to speak. So, if you're in the accounting department, the only training we're going to give you is to make you better at the job you already do. And we very rarely say, hey, why don't you go work over in HR for 6 months? Or why don't you do a project in conjunction with HR and see how the finance division works hand in hand with the HR division? Or why don't you go to operations? So I feel one of the processes that people go through in our curriculum is having exposure to other departments, but again, that's just an element of it. We also teach continuous improvement, which a lot of folks don't realize or don't embrace as their own personal responsibility, right? We feel like, well, when the organization makes a change, then we'll follow along. They'll tell us what to do next. When we don't have necessarily the chutzpah to say, there's a better way to do this, and I'm going to bring it up to my boss, or I'm just going to work on it as a side project, and then ta-da, reveal it to my boss that there's actually a better way to do my job. So it's not just the decision making. There's a lot of other topics that are potential things that we can help people to learn and expand. So your question was, so how do you get somebody to give up their base thinking skills and think more broadly? And truly, it's through experience, and that's one of the reasons why our curriculum takes a long time. It's planned to be a 3-year curriculum. It's planned to slowly meet out and build upon prior skills. So it almost is like a college curriculum in that sense, although, again, in college, you're doing everything specific to a topic and for a short period of time. I mean, you will take a language for 2 years and then you'll never revisit it again. I was just watching a comedy skit the other day where this fellow said, here's everything you'll learn about language in your college career, and he came up with hola and de nada, and that's it. Like, that's all you'll remember after your 2 semesters of taking a language. So the thing that we do is, or the process that we follow, is a long-term immersion into the types of things that we need to help people get better at in terms of their thinking, and we hit the topic in various ways over various years. And I'll come back to that in a second, and it's always in combination with coaching, because you only know what you know, right? I mean, it's hard for you to identify your areas of weakness, but it's easier for you to identify that if somebody asks you some high-gain questions that says, well, so how did that work out, and is there another way you could have done that, and do you think you might have been able to speed that up, or do you think if you had brought a different team member in, or let that team member go earlier in the process because it turned out they were dragging down the process, just if you have somebody who asks you these kinds of questions that help you reflect, you get a better understanding of how you came to your own decisions, and you realize that there are other possibilities, that there are other perspectives of how to get something done. So let me give you an example. We'll go back to decision making. Say we want to teach decision making, and we now know that we have this 3-year curriculum in which we would continually revisit that topic. And they're not always, like classes. It's not like year 1 you're taking decision making 101, which is what college does, right? And then year 2 you're taking decision making 202. I mean, you might have all 3 of these things that I'm about to explain, within 1 year. It all depends on how we're going to design that curriculum. But at the first level, the first thing we want you to do is understand that there are decision-making models. Like, most of us don't even know that there are different ways that people can make decisions. And then we also want you to understand that there are different ways that you as an individual make decisions as opposed to way groups make decisions, so that you're just aware of what might be influencing your decision making. And we also have some self-assessments that people will take. Like Harvard has this implicit test that you can take online, which is about racial bias. And so anybody can take that if you just Google implicit Harvard. But it's those kinds of self-assessments where you just get people to gut reaction. How would you view this? How would you make this decision? And then let's go back and analyze, Is that what the majority of people would think? Is that something that, extrapolated 3 months or 3 years down the road? What could be the ramifications of that? So first level, it's awareness. Like, what is decision making? How do you make decisions? What are the other possible ways you could make decisions? And then in the next round of when decision making would come back into the curriculum, we might step it up and teach people about negotiation skills. And the nuance here is, when you're negotiating, you're making decisions about what is or is not viable and what is or is not plausible. So let's say you're a salesperson. Like, we had a sales organization that was a client once, and the salespeople sold multi-thousand-dollar, a six-figure plus services to their clients. But there was a back end that had to process those services. And what we realized, or what our client came to us and said, help us fix this, the problem was that the salespeople were completely focused on the dollar amount. And so they would say, yay, I just made a $300,000 sale. But if you analyzed all the work that had to go into supporting that service for that client, they might be losing like $25,000 a year. So is it worth it to make the $300,000 sale when in the end our company's actually not making any money? So there's negotiation. What are you willing to give to the client to make that sale, and when is it okay to walk away? I mean, that's something people don't, especially salespeople, don't think about. Like, in their mind, it's never okay to walk away. But if you understood the big picture about how your company makes money and what it takes to service a client, you would know at a certain point, this is where we walk away. This is where this is not a viable client for us anymore. So we would start to, in the next phase of decision making, we'd start to sharpen people's perceptions, where they could look at things more objectively and more critically, and not based on my own motivations or my own understanding of a situation. And then in the next phase, we get into those really interesting nuances, in my mind, where we start asking people to examine their biases. Do you even know what your biases are, and how are those formed? Like you said, in the lizard brain, we just have this baseline thinking about what is right and what is wrong. And sometimes when you say to people, well, how did you come to that decision? They're like, I don't know. I mean, isn't that obvious? Well, no, it's not obvious. Not everybody would have made that decision. So, that's why we're asking you, again, one of those high gain reflective questions, like what brought you to this decision? And there's a line of thinking or training called polarity thinking, which is really fascinating, which is enabling people to hold two opposing ideas in their mind at the same time and see the merits of both of those, and then come to a better, well-rounded, well-reasoned decision. And so that would be like the denouement, the pinnacle of helping people to make better decisions, is, can you see both sides of an argument? Like, I've always said, I would be terrible on a jury, because as long as there's a reasonable argument, I will agree with you. So, first the defense would give their argument. I'd be like, oh, yeah, absolutely, not guilty. Then the prosecution would give their argument, like, oh, well, that's obvious. That person is guilty. Like, well, as long as there's a reasonable argument, I will agree with it. So it's that level, this pinnacle of decision making is, can you hold two different arguments in your mind at the same time and still make a well-reasoned decision?
Well, that one sounds fascinating. I'd love to hear more about that. Okay, so just from the little bit, and clearly this is a really in-depth, a really robust curriculum. We can't really do it justice in this amount of time, but that explains why this is something that a company embarks on that is a commitment of years rather than a one-time shot. So does that make the relationship with your client different, and how does it make it different? Are there some companies that are more likely to embrace this than others, or what do you think about that?
I think it makes the relationship slightly different, not much, because in my heart, we're still a work-for-hire organization. We are doing it for you, for your benefit. We're going to be involved with you in developing this curriculum longer than we normally would with an organization, but it's still completely your curriculum. Even if we were to work with 3 different organizations simultaneously, the curriculums would never be the same, because it's customized for your organization. So at the end of the 3 years, once we've got people, I call them cohorts, because we want people to go through in smaller groups, so they're kind of like mastermind groups at the same time while they're learning all this. Once we've got those cohorts through their third year and they've gone through the whole curriculum, then we walk away at that point, and it's self-sustaining within the organization. So it's your curriculum to deliver, ad infinitum after that. So it does change our relationship slightly, but basically only in tenure, not in our intention or what the end deliverables are.
Okay.
To what kind of organization does this? It's an organization, to me, that is forward thinking, and that is very tough to find when you have a public organization, because they are usually shareholder interests focused, right? So they're more focused on what's going to happen this quarter or what's going to happen this year, and our platform is, this takes a long time to implement, takes a long time to get people up to the level of skill that you need them to be at, but the future output of that is amazing, because you have everybody in your organization who can make better decisions, who's making ethical decisions, who understands how your business runs, who understands what your business strategy is, and so the chances of them going off and doing something, kaflooey, like bending emissions rules or setting up fake accounts, is less likely to happen. And more importantly, and Margie, you and I have had this conversation for years now, we really have to think about who's going to lead our organizations in the next 15 or 20 years, because the boomers are leaving in droves, and then the next generation, Gen X, is just not as big in terms of population. Demographically, it's not as big, and so we're going to have a lot of millennials who will be rising to positions of leadership sooner rather than later. There used to be kind of a pattern that you would join an organization at the bottom and you would work your way up, and by the time you were in your 40s or 50s, you would have a senior management position, and by the time you were in your 50s or 60s, you might be in the C-suite. But that was based on a lifetime, essentially, of learning everything that I'm talking about. Now you're learning how the business works, you're learning how to make decisions, you're learning how to manage other people, and so one of the impetuses for an organization to embrace this curriculum is that we are going to speed all of that up for you, because you don't have time to wait for people to get into their 40s and 50s to be a well-rounded individual in your organization.
Oh, I totally agree with you, and this is probably a chance for me to actually plug an ebook we wrote together on this subject, and I've made some presentations about it, and I know you have as well. And people can get that ebook from either of our sites, teaching leaders how to think, and addressing the coming crisis in leadership development. I probably don't have our title exactly right, because it just popped in my head.
Nor do I. It's a long title.
Yeah, but it's but a good one. Let's talk for a little minute about Learning Binge, because one of the reasons why I recruited you as a founding member of Learning Binge, and folks listening to the podcast will hear more and more about that, but just in case people don't know, Learning Binge is an online site for leaders and people who care about helping people learn, and it's kind of that it's giving the shoemaker's children shoes, to play off the old adage that the shoemaker's children are always the ones going barefoot because he's too busy taking care of his clients. And that happens to us in the learning profession, is that there's never any time to upskill ourselves, because we're always meeting deliverables. And so we always think we're going to watch that interesting webinar or read that great book, and somehow it doesn't happen. So what Learning Binge does is it lets you get very concise online courses you can take when you want, pick it up, start it, come back to it when you have more time, from the real thought leaders in our profession. And certainly Nanette Miner qualifies as one of those, as you guys can tell from the deep thinking she's done about developing leaders. So you can expect to see some interesting content from her coming up on Learning Binge as well. And I just wanted to let everybody know about that. And so, Nanette, we know you're working on your curriculum for hire, which includes the thinking curriculum. Is there anything else you're kind of tinkering with that's got you really excited, that you kind of give us a sneak preview of? What else is up for you? What's coming next?
I would say no, there's nothing else because this is all-encompassing and it's a passion. However, I would say in the same vein, I've decided that I'm probably going to write my third book, which when I wrote my second one, I swore I'd never do again because it's a very painful process. But I feel so passionate about this topic, and I feel that like the curriculum design that we would do for an organization benefits the workers. So our focus is always on, how can we help those individual employees become better at their thinking skills. What level I'm jumping over is the person who might be implementing that. And so, which if you hired us, that would be us. But my thinking is, we can't be all things to all people. We can't be everywhere. This is a very time-intensive and labor-intensive process for us when we work with an organization. So I'm thinking in my spare time, as we know we have so little of it, to start like a field guide to how to teach thinking skills. So, what I just said to you was it's so important to teach decision making, and here's 3 ways that we could do it over the course of 3 different increasingly more difficult aspects of how decisions are made. The next step would be to just create a reference for anybody who is a leader in learning, a leader in learning, who could pick that up and say, what my people really need? They really need decision making. They really need to know continuous improvement. They really need to be better at creativity. And it's not buying a curriculum off the shelf, as you alluded to at the beginning. There's nothing that will pre-package for you and say, here it is, here's how to teach creativity. But it's more a field guide that says, here are some possible ways that people will become more creative. You could do this, you could do that. So we're just kind of consulting with them, but through a book is my gist, I guess. So, what kind of conversations would I have with you if you were starting as my client, and what kind of suggestions would I offer? And then in our initial conversation, if we were about to do business, you would say, oh, this sounds great, that sounds great, we'll do these 3 things. But there are 17 things I presented to you. So that's what I want to do, is to kind of make a field guide where any leader who chose not to work with us, and obviously not everyone will still have the capability of doing that should they choose to increase the thinking skills in their employees. And again, it doesn't have to be a curriculum. There's plenty of other ways that you can teach all sorts of different thinking skills by stretch assignments and job rotations and team projects, and just even mixing up a team project. Like say you have a regular training class. I'm using air quotes here, but let's say in a particular training class you have a project working and you have a team working on a project. What happens if in the middle of that project you take away one of their resources, or you tell them that the deadline has been speeded up by a month? Like that alone changes the way people set priorities, make decisions, think about the outcomes, right? So, I mean, it doesn't have to be a whole curriculum. It's just, here are some ideas for what you could do to stretch people's ability to think and enhance their abilities to think.
Well, it sounds like a really practical, useful book that I'm certainly going to want to read. And we'll have you back to talk about it when you're ready, so our listeners can look forward to that. So everybody, you've been listening to me, Margie Meacham, author of Brain Matters, How to Help Anyone Learn Anything Using Neuroscience, and hopefully my second book, Brain Matters 2, coming out like Nanette, when I can finish it in all my wonderful free time. And you've been listening to me talk to the very fascinating and highly gifted Nanette Miner and her really kind of revolutionary ideas of how we're going to teach the new leaders coming up how to think, since old ways are no longer available to them. Mm-hmm. So Nanette, how can they get in touch with you?
Oh, they can come to our website. It's trainingdr, TRAININGDR, trainingdoctor.com, or they can reach us at 843-647-6304, or follow us on Twitter at trainingdoctor, all spelled out, trainingdoctor.
Okay, everybody, and with that, I'm going to sign out. Thank you so much for joining us today, Nanette. Thank you, everybody, for listening to the podcast, and we will catch you next time.